Imagine a dark fantasy Fire Emblem with realistic visuals. I'm talking about strategic turn-based combat, upgrading character classes with visual changes, a weapon triangle, and much more. Well, then you'd have Annulus from Nirvana. As a part of Steam Next Fest, the team invited me to try their early demo, and in this video, I'll be walking through everything I experienced. And special thanks to Annulus for sponsoring this video. So let's just dive on in with the most exciting aspect, the combat. Now, if you've ever played a strategy RPG before, you should be familiar with how Annulus works. If not, let me give you a quick rundown. Basically, the whole game is kind of mission-based. You have a list of missions that you can take on, and then you go into the battle. So you basically select a battle from the menu, and it'll have specific objectives, typically defeating all enemies. Sometimes there's like a big boss to defeat. Now, the boss fights are interesting because they can be in an awkward position to get to. For example, the boss was behind this giant tree, and it took a while to get to the boss, and I couldn't really use all my troops because the boss was sort of blocked in. So I had to use my swap ability so I could get better positioning and get more hits on him. And honestly, I did a pretty bad job too, as you can see by my troops HP in this battle. It just further emphasizes how important strategy and troop selection are in tougher fights. And here in Annulus, they have bonus win conditions that give you extra rewards. For example, maybe none of your troops die, you have to win within a certain number of turns, things like that. And this is good because it helps you refine your strategy just so you get everything down perfect so you can get all those bonus items. And you can also replay battles to grind or fulfill all these bonus objectives. Now, when you start the battle, you can place troops on pre-designated spots. When you start the game, there's only 3 troops you can bring in per battle, but slowly you can gain up to 4, at least from what I played. And I actually like this because there's other strategy RPGs I've played where there's like 10 or even 20 troops on the battlefield, and it's super hard to keep track of everything. So when it's limited to only 3 or 4, you really have to focus on what your team is and what your strategy is. And with each battle, you need to think strategically based on the enemy troop layout. You need to make sure that your weaknesses match theirs, and you don't want to place your troops next to enemies that they're weak to. And you also have to keep things like stage hazards in mind. For example, some maps can have barricades that you need to break down that enemies are hiding behind. There could be exploding barrels that have like fire or poison on the ground. Now, what's interesting about the exploding stage hazards is that they don't just explode, but they stay on the ground around the barrel that exploded for a number of turns. If your troops or if the enemies walk through any of the stage hazards, they get debuffs like poison, fire, or even freeze. This is a super helpful tool, but also something to be cautious of when positioning your troops and when attacking. So you think to yourself, is it better to place melee or ranged troops in these different spots? It's all part of the strategy for each battle. And again, with the smaller scope of each battle, they kind of feel like mini puzzles, which I liked. You're trying to figure out the optimal strategy for each fight to get all the rewards and move on to the next fight. And they grow increasingly more fun as you get more troops with different capabilities, so you have more options in each fight. For example, you could get troops with mounts, troops that can fly, archers, mages, and all kinds of fun stuff. And the other thing that I like is that fights are never too long, maybe like 5 minutes tops. It gives the game a really good sense of pacing, so you can either replay it quickly if you want to get all the bonus rewards, or just go on to the next fight. Annulus is great for either quick gameplay sessions here and there, or for longer ones if you're just in a nice flow. Now, the one thing I'll say compared to other typical strategy RPGs is that positioning doesn't really matter, whether it be like if you're attacking from the side or behind, as enemies always turn around to face you head on whenever you attack them. It really is more about weaknesses and class effectiveness. Honestly, I would have preferred to have, bonuses from the side or behind, as it would have added another layer of strategy, but clearly the developers are going for a more streamlined process to the battles here, and that's totally okay too. Now, when you attack enemies, the enemies will always counterattack back, and you'll always do the same as well. So this is important to keep in mind, especially if, for example, you're about to attack an enemy, but you're low on HP, and if they counterattack, they will defeat you, especially if you don't defeat them. And each character also has special attacks that make for some cool tactical decisions. Some special attack examples could be you attack the enemy, but then you swap places. You could push enemies into other enemies or exploding obstacles doing bonus damage. My archer character could attack when it's not even their turn, or even multiple times in a row. Now, to do special attacks, you need to build up a meter, and you typically can't use these special attacks more than once per battle, so you have to be very thoughtful for when you decide to use it. Again, another strategic element to keep in mind. And again, I often replayed levels just to see if I could come up with a more optimal strategy with other troops, or if I could just do it in fewer turns. So if you like strategy RPGs and you like min-maxing, there's a lot of fun to be had here. Now you can eventually level up your characters to more refined classes with different visual looks and new abilities. I love this feature in Fire Emblem, and I enjoyed it here too. It allows you to add your signature touch to your army as you're building it. And battlefields also change later with varying terrain height and weather elements that you need to account for, all contributing to deeper strategic combat. Now something else that's interesting here in Annulus is there is a sort of morality chart. Now when the game first introduces the morality system that they call the royalty attribute level, it gives you a number of choices to kick it off, so you sort of have a preset grid of decisions to start with. They ask some pretty interesting questions too, like what would you do if an army under your control rebelled? Or what price would you be willing to pay to have your greatest wish granted? Interesting and thoughtful questions that weren't exactly easy to answer. And there's some pretty cool art on these cards as well. And you'll get more questions like this as the game goes on that influences your royalty attribute. Depending on choices you make and how you reply to each character in conversations in the story can evolve. So this sort of adds a different role-playing element to the game, and it allows you to shape the story in your way. It's fun to see where your choices can take you, and there's like 4 different paths that the game charts. So it's really interesting to see where it goes, and I don't think any 2 players' choices are going to be the same. Now we dove pretty in-depth into the combat, but I gotta touch on the visuals because they are pretty spectacular here. Again, it has this sort of cool, dark fantasy art style. It kind of blends more stylized and photoreal. It's like Lovecraft meets medieval fantasy. Lots of cool monsters and world designs, and I really love the overall vibe and feel the team is going for. Not to mention it has some really nice lighting and gives battlefields a really dark, moody feel. The game also has these really impressive pre-rendered cutscenes. It kind of gives me old school like World of Warcraft vibes, or even Diablo vibes, especially with how the game is leaning more into like a dark fantasy feeling, which is pretty similar to Diablo. Highly cinematic and super well done, and surprisingly like violent and dark at times. So if you're into that, this game is going to be right up your alley. And I will say there's a surprising amount of them. In the handful of hours I played, there was probably like half a dozen cutscenes that came up, so if you missed those from the old days, there's plenty to get into here. As far as voice acting goes, it is fully voiced in Chinese, and obviously there's text in English so you can understand. The game is still in its pre-release phase, so some of the text is still being refined and polished. Overall, I had a fun time with Annulus. Like I said, it has this really great dark fantasy art style, cool pre-rendered cutscenes, fun strategic battles with lots of strategy, and lots of different characters to try out with different abilities. So if you're like me and you love tactical RPGs like Fire Emblem, you definitely need to give Annulus a try. You can try the demo for free right now on Steam as part of Steam Next Fest and wishlist it today. The game's launch is right around the corner, so you definitely want to get ready for when it comes out. Special thanks once again to Annulus and the team at Nirvana for giving me an early look at the demo and for sponsoring this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you guys next time.